Hello to our viewers. This is our this is already fourth episode of Daniel and Paul. And today, oh boy, we have a really interesting episode for you, really interesting topic inside Putin's head. All right, where to begin? There's so many things to talk about here. And I think it would be good. Sorry, my apologies. First of all, hello, Daniel. How are you?
Hi there. I'm fine. How are you?
Good, good.
I can hear that you're not alone as well.
Yes, yes. We have a guest that's sitting here trying to fall asleep. Okay, so where should we begin?
Yeah.
There's so many topics to discuss when we think about Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. And I think the best place to start is with a question why the Western world should care about how Putin thinks, how Russia operates, and I guess the first question that I would like to ask you, Daniel, I have discussion about it, is from a cultural perspective. Where does Russia come in? Is Russia more of Asian culture? Is it more of a European culture? Maybe from history? Uh, how uh, how does work from history perspective? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a very good and interesting question. And actually, in Russia, you could say that it's one of the main issues that for many people, uh, it's it's a decisive point because a lot of conservative people they always claim that Russia is a civilization on its own right, while almost most liberals they claim that Russia is part of Europe. And so what I want to stress is that this question is not really decided in Russia itself. So we've got different opinions. However, however, I mean you can have different opinions, but it doesn't mean that they're all correct. And after all, to say that Russia is an Asian culture, I mean, I think it's really ridiculous because first of all, we must understand what we mean by word Asian, like what China and Japan, Korea, or maybe India. I don't know, but I think that it's clear to all that China and India are so far from Russia on any aspect that saying that Russia is an Asian culture is ridiculous. At the same time, uh, yeah, it's certainly true that Russia is quite far from Western Europe in many aspects as well. However, it's much closer to Europe, to Western Europe, than China or Japan. And any person who will go to Russia from France or from Germany, yeah, he will see the differences, but he will still find a lot of things in common. But if he will go to China, he will understand that that's really another culture. So yeah, Russia lies at the fringes of Europe. So it was always, so to say, a border state. Uh, while most of Europe it belonged to the Catholic Church and they used the Latin script, for example, Russia belonged to the uh, Orthodox Church and they use the Cyrillic script. And it's a very important point because once you spread information, like people in Russia didn't know Latin, and the scholars didn't know Latin, they didn't use Latin script, and they belonged to another church. And the Catholic world, it was a kind of united entity. So you've got a lot of differences, but still it's a Christian culture. They had ties different diplomatic, economical ties with Europe the whole time. Sometimes it was they were less significant, but they were there the whole time. So yeah, Russia is part of Europe, even though yeah, it's border state. So it's not West Europe, but it's East Europe, it's Eastern. easternmost country in Europe, but still Europe. And what do you think, Pavel? Like, is Russia for you? Is it part of the East or part of the West, or maybe you think it's an entirely dependent and different entity?
I think that question is very interesting. I kind of tend to agree with most of the things you said. Um, if anything, if I had to add anything, I would stress, and I think you touched on it a little bit. I would stress that Russia is so huge, um, and you can't really look at Russia as one big homogeneous piece of land and people. There is a lot of different cultures inside Russia that all consider themselves Russians, and they're geographically located in different areas of Russia. Um, and so I kind of always felt that Russia is more European, definitely feels like European when you talk to Russians, but it has touches of Asia as well, right? Especially different people that live on the border with China. Um, it's funny because the way they look, you might think that they're Asian, but then when you start talking to them, you get a different sense. So I think it's a mix of cultures, not necessarily 50-50 mix. And I definitely see Russia, uh, not just from a cultural perspective, but from a historic perspective, that over the years, it played a big role in I don't know if maturement is the right word, in the development, the way Europe evolved. Russia had big big role in that, and I think today one must look at both geography, as we discussed, and the culture aspect, and that would be some of the reasons why we should care about what Putin thinks, what Russia thinks.
Well, Pavel, I can certainly agree on most things that you said, but just, for example, like 80% plus of the Russian population, they live in the European part of Russia, and that is certainly correct that the territory is huge, but at the same time, most of this territory is empty. It's just empty. No one lives there, and you've got small enclaves in certain areas like Vladivostok or Khabarovsk or Novosibirsk, uh, and they are surrounded by nothing. But once you go there, you can still see almost the same things that you see in central Russian regions. You've got, from the ethnic perspective, most of the people in these cities, they are Russians. The architecture, the administrative structure, the educational system, it is all Russian. And that is also certainly correct that you've got some, ethnic people, ethnicities, local people who live in those parts of Russia. But if you think about it, from a cultural perspective, like you said, Russia, you had the Mongols, who were a big problem for Russia for like hundreds of years. But and the Russian, they had, they learned something from those Mongols, and it has to do, maybe more with the way you rule people. So it was a really major change because beforehand, Russia, Russia in the 12th century, it was much closer to the way people, lived somewhere in the eastern areas. You had a lot of principalities, semi-independent principalities, and they all fought each other. And you didn't have all those tyrannical rulers. You had like nobility and things like that. And after the Mongols, you had a much more centralized state. But everything that has to do with science, education, culture, it all came from the West. Everything, like 99.9%. So I mean, from that perspective, you've got classical music. In Russia, it's no, it's European classical music. You've got great literature, or if you had science, it's not Mongol science. It wasn't Chinese science. It was the influence of European science. So that's what I mean. That Russia is much more European than it is Asian. Uh,
Okay, perfect. That sounds interesting. I always liked history and the cultural aspect of that as well. And I would like to ask, why is Russia, Putin stands at the head of Russia, right? Why is Russia important today? Maybe it's because of its big, huge, and strong military. Maybe it's because of some scandals it was involved. For example, poisoning ex-agents, and the latest Navalny, the opposition leader. Why, in your opinion, today Russia is important and people should understand Russia better?
uh, well, I think that in a certain to a certain degree, this question, I mean, it might sound like even strange, odd, because people are interested in Russia, even though it's not like top's priority, but people are still interested in what is going on in Russia and how it affects everything. Like everyone in the States thinks that the Russian hackers are going to, to elect the next president. Even though for me it sounds ridiculous because all I read about it, it shows that the way they might maybe change the minds of some like tens, like, I don't know, a couple of thousands people. Like it's stupid to think that they can really change something. But yeah, the things that you said, they are certainly correct. Like maybe it's not the size of a Russian army; it's more the fact that they have the biggest or like the equal arsenal of nuclear weapons, like the states. So they have the capability to destroy every country in the world, and it's something we must, be aware of because you've got only two countries with such huge arsenal of weapons. So Russia is one of them. Uh, Russia does, it is true that Russia poisoned some people. I don't want to over exaggerate the importance of that, but if you think about it, the only real change like that had to do with the conflict of one country annexing a part of the other. The Russians did it in 2014 after, I mean, the Second World War. So the Russians are trying, to play their own game, and it's not. I think that what makes it really important is the fact that they have President Putin at their head. He's the president for the last 20 years, and he's pretty much omnipotent inside Russia, so he can do whenever he pleases. So it means that as a single person, and I stress it, he's probably the strongest person in the world because like a lot of people think that like, the president of the states is the strongest person in the world, but it's not correct because everyone saw that Trump is actually can't do whenever he wants. You've got a very strong state machine. You've got the Senate. You've got the Congress, and you've got a Senate. You've got, I mean, governors, and you've got independent people. He can't do whatever he wants. In China, actually, maybe today, Mr. Xi, maybe he's got more power than Putin. I mean, but he's not omnipotent in China. He got his own, he got his Politburo, people who make decisions. So he's not the tyrant. And Putin, if he would like, to annex, I don't know, Belarus tomorrow, uh, no one is going to stand there and tell him like it's a bad idea, or maybe you've got those people, but at the end Putin is going to decide, and if he wants to do it, he will do it. and Putin. And actually, that's the main idea. We want to know to speak about what Putin thinks, and when we speak about Russia, what Russia thinks, it's actually and why Russia is important. So maybe the question is what Putin thinks.
Okay, so we need to understand what Putin thinks in order to understand Russia. So usually people, what they know about Putin, they know that he is the president of Russia. Maybe if they know a little bit more, they understand a little bit of the politics inside Russia. They know that he can do whatever, almost whatever he wants. I think his power is very high. So if you want to compare like presidential power, like in the States, to declare war, you need to get Congress approval. In Russia, you need to get Putin's approval. Putin would
Theoretically,
send the
I
head.
mean, practically.
Yeah. So I know, and maybe our viewers know as well that he speaks German. He worked a little bit in Germany. That he is, of course, well, obviously, he was not born a president, right? So let's try to understand Putin a little bit better by understanding his background. So what can you tell us about President Putin's background?
Yeah, well, I certainly think that it is important because you know today in the West, so people they look at Putin as a kind of like the KGB agent who turned into president, and to a certain degree, it is certainly true, but it's not the whole truth. And half truth, something which is like half a truth, sometimes it's very misleading. And I think, yeah, that's why it is important to understand who is Putin, and who Putin was before he became president. So Putin, like he's 68 years old. So as you can understand, he was born in 1952, which means that at the time the Soviet Union collapsed, he was already almost 40 years old. So I don't know like how old each of our viewers, but like just think about yourself. If you are not yet 40 years old, so think about it that all your life uh, developed in a certain state, like very different from the state you live in now. Everything changed around you, and if you are like older than 40, so you can understand how significant part of your life you lived before that point. So from that point, I would like to start, and I wanted to stress it that he grew up, he matured in the Soviet Union in the time of the Cold War. And moreover, he had actually like two older brothers. Both of them died, but one of them died in 1942 at the age of 2, and it was in the siege of Leningrad. His mother was also there, and his father was fighting in the front. And Putin, as much as we can tell, it's a very significant event for him. This siege of Leningrad, you had about 1 million people in the city starved to death during the Nazi blockade. It was one of the main events for this city. Like it's St. Petersburg. It's called St. Petersburg. It was called Leningrad back in the day. And Putin, from as much as we know, already since he was like a teenager, he wanted to join the KGB. He really wanted to join the KGB. So after he finished high school, he came to the KGB and he kind of applied like I want to be with the KGB. And he also told that he liked spy movies and things like that when he was a child. So in certain perspective, you can say, okay, nothing special in that. A lot of children, I think it's like so cool. You had the bad guys, and in the States, people think, yeah, Soviets, they were like the evil empire, but that's not the way, people in Russia, children in Russia perceive themselves. They didn't think that, well, I belong to the evil empire, I'm serving the evil state. No, most of the children, they thought that they were the good side, and the bad side were, like the Americans, the capitalists, like those who no, don't respect workers' rights and so on. And that's how people perceive it. So maybe this attempt to join the KGB, well, but still, it's kind of, it can explain us his set of mind, like someone who wants to work, to be a part of this big organization, to be part of the state. And actually, in the KGB, they told him like, well, we are sorry, if you want to join us, you should go and have a good higher education first. And actually, he did. So he went to school. He studied. He became a lawyer. He studied like international law for 5 years. It was part of actually in Russia, and when you studied the field of that kind, you had to join the party. It was kind of a requirement, and he joined the party. And we don't know exactly at what point. He probably applied for the KGB already during his studies. At any case, in 1975, after he finished his education, he started working for the KGB. First, it was in Russia. Probably, as far as we know, he didn't do anything like really fancy, but because afterwards, I actually don't remember if he started studying German already in high school, which is very probable, or in school, because in Russia, usually you could choose to learn either English or German or French. But then once he was moved to Moscow, where he continued his studies in the KGB on like a higher level, and afterwards he was sent to Dresden. There he kind of worked undercover because he like worked in a cultural center, but all the KGB agents, they always work in some cultural center. But as far as we know, also he wasn't James Bond. I mean, the really tough agents, they were not. Dresden was part of the GDR. Yeah, it's like the Democratic German Republic, DDR.
So they were
Deutsche
more
Demokratische,
under
Deutsche,
USSR influence.
yeah, Deutsche Demokratische Republik, and naturally it was Stasi. You had the Stasi there, and everything was controlled either by the Stasi, and the KGB were, so to say, the foreign boss. They were pretty much independent. Actually, people think that they were ruled from Moscow. It's not correct. All those republics, they had a lot of independence. I mean, at least everything that had to do with inner affairs, not foreign affairs, but affairs of the state. So Putin worked there for about 6 years. He lived there, and what is also interesting that, as far as we know, I mentioned it more than once, that at the time he worked in the KGB was like the best time of his life. So okay. So, but I think that is interesting. But what is really interesting is what comes next. So, 1990, the Soviet Union starts to,
Sorry,
you know,
before
like
1990, could you describe us the example that's being used very often where, or maybe that's what you wanted to describe now, where there was a big crowd outside of this building where he used to work, where there was a lot of secret documents, right? And they wanted to go into the, can you describe us that, you know what incident I'm talking about?
I think that I know what you mean, but as far as I know, we cannot we can't be sure that it really happened, or like Putin claimed that at a certain point of time, so he burned some secret KGB memos and information because he was afraid that the crowd is going to get inside the building. Uh, Whether it happened or not, we cannot tell because Putin, well, we know that he can lie, like the guy can lie. and he
That's what
lies. And
spies do, right? They lie, right? That's how that's the
yeah,
definition of their job.
yes, spies and politicians. Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, and Putin is both, you know. So yeah, but yeah, I don't know if it happened. I don't know how important it was for him, or maybe actually maybe it did play a role in the way he understands things. Maybe he just invented that story, you know, just to stress the situation. But you know, in any case, once this GDR, you know, you had this union process with Germany and the Russians under Gorbachev, they decided to pull out, to get men out. And then suddenly Putin finds himself in Russia. Everything collapses around him, like the KGB, like this almighty uh, state, hand of state, suddenly is muted, can't do anything. Like everyone thought that it's omnipotent, and actually it was not, apparently. And Putin himself claims, and he told it on several occasions, that he uh, decided to leave the KGB, that he wrote like the resignation letter at the day that the coup attempt in 1991 against Gorbachev started. And I just want to explain what it was. Like you had the Gorbachev, who was he was kind of liberal in this Politburo, uh, uh, in this as a head of government. Uh, he didn't really want, you know, to disband the Soviet Union. He just wanted to make some reforms. But in any case, you had very conservative people. Some of them were very strong, and in 1991 they wanted to stop the whole process of Soviet Union collapse, and they tried to. Actually, there is a big issue about this putsch. No one, you've got some claims that Gorbachev actually knew exactly what was going on, but he didn't want to play a role, so he played himself as if he was, you know, detained, put to house arrest. We are not clear about it, but in any case, what is clear that the people who attempted this coup, they were like arch conservatives. They wanted the old good Soviet style system back, and they didn't want to have any reforms. And Putin, he said that he didn't want anything to do with those people. So, like you can say, like he was like, so he was liberal after all. Like he was against this, you know, Soviet style machine. And actually, Putin mentioned on more than one occasion, especially in the 90s and in his first term, that he thinks that communism is a very bad idea and the Soviet Union was an oppressive state. But in the last 15 years, he spoke less and less about it. But he used to say it. And it's also important because the fact that he doesn't say it now, it doesn't mean that he didn't think that way, you know, 20 years ago. Maybe his perspective changed because now he's the omnipotent ruler and he thinks differently on things. He looked on other angle upon like 20 years ago. But in any case, and it's what's really interesting that in the 90s, in the beginning of the 90s, Putin started to work in the state, in the city
Think
government of on St. Petersburg and under Sobchak, and he was a close associate of Sobchak. And who was Sobchak? And yeah, people don't
defab.
know. Yeah. People no people. I mean, they don't know who Sobchak is. Not the father, not the daughter. I mean, outside of Russia. And Sobchak, he was one of the biggest, you know, liberals of his transition period. He was a kind of, you know, a very liberal guy who was for like he was for a market economy. He was against this party domination. He was for freedom. He was for democracy. He was for like all, you know, all the good things, like the capital, all the good things as they are perceived in the West. And Putin came to him, and he very soon he became his right hand. And you say, like, actually it's also interesting that an ex-KGB officer, and he works in for a person who is like opposed to the system for sure, who is opposed for the uh,
Yeah,
and also Putin, he was involved in some scandals during his first Sobchak administration in St. Petersburg. It's not exactly clear to us how if he was really like if it was his fault, if he stole like a lot of money, but presumably he shipped a lot of goods to the West, and they were supposed to get like 93 or something like $1 million back in return, but this money never came. Like the city didn't get this money, and there was an investigation. They didn't decide that Putin stole the money per se, but they said that it was like very fishy, and the prices they were like they couldn't understand how they priced the whole thing, and those negotiations they didn't go the way they should have gone, and they actually recommended that Putin should be released from his position. But Sobchak, he didn't want to do it, so Putin stayed.
mhm.
And afterwards, Sobchak lost the next elections. Actually, Putin was the person who led the elections. I don't know, like what was the head of his election apparatus, and he probably had luck at that point. He was transferred to Moscow, and he started working for the government. Uh, at first, in not the most important position, but somehow it was. It's not exactly clear to us because all those things they're kind of we don't know who made those decisions. But in 1998, suddenly he was nominated as the head of FSB, Federal. It's like the Russian kind of KGB.
Oh, sorry,
Uh,
before that, wasn't Sobchak assassinated at a certain year?
no, no, Sobchak, no, no. Sobchak died in 2001, I think, and
Oh,
he had like, yeah, yeah. He actually had like suffered. Putin actually tried to help him. It's like another story that the Russian government wanted to persecute Sobchak, and Putin helped him to escape.
oh,
As far as yeah, escape abroad. I mean abroad. Uh, yeah. In any case, like in 1998, Putin becomes the head of the Federal Security Services, like this FSB. It's like kind of a KGB, inherited the KGB. And also, it was quite a shock for many people. But suddenly, in August 1999, President Yeltsin, who was old and sick, he nominated Putin to be. He appointed him as acting prime minister. Yeah. So after Putin was nominated as acting prime minister, so actually everyone understood that Yeltsin wants him to be his successor because Yeltsin he was at the end of his second term and he was old and sick. And actually, that's exactly what happened because unexpectedly on December 31st of 1991, Yeltsin resigned, and I remember it pretty well. Like this, suddenly, in his New Year's speech, he said that that's enough of him. He's going home, and what it meant that second in command, it's like the prime minister. He will be the president for before the elections, and after 3 months, you had the elections, and Putin was elected by a majority of 53%. And I just want to sum it up to this point. So you could say like he started like as a KGB agent, and he was a KGB agent for 15 years. And in the 90s, he became associated with liberals, like the liberal people were presumed to be liberals in Russia, like Sobchak. And afterwards, Yeltsin, he destroyed his communist system after all. And you had like the Communist Party, and Yeltsin, naturally, he opposed the Communist Party, and he fought the Communist Party. And Yeltsin was the man who selected Putin to be his successor. So it's very interesting because, as much as we know, a lot of people say it, that they were pretty much sure that Putin is someone who will continue, policy as in the same direction as Yeltsin did. And it was the main idea about it, to put someone without very big ideas, because Putin was no one thought of Putin that he's a very talented or independent guy. They thought that they will be able to control him. Putin, Yeltsin's family uh, really ruled, kind of like they didn't have so much authority and power as Putin did, but they were strong enough. They wanted to select someone who will retain their power. Yeah, someone whom they will be able to control. And another interesting fact I want to mention before I finish with this introduction is that the liberal press and most of the TV in Russia in the 90s, it was like controlled by some kind of liberal-minded oligarchs. It's problematic to say it, but they were like liberal in the sense that they were for a free market and they wanted just to have business with everyone, like free, from an economical perspective. They were like liberal, not in the American sense, in the European sense. They wanted to have freedom. They wanted to make money, and they supported Putin because they thought Putin, it will be better for them to work under Putin. So you've got like 2000, the year was 2000, was like March, and Putin was elected to his first term in power.
Okay, so that's a lot to take in. If anything, I would add, just so that our viewers can understand the Russian people a little bit better. The Russian people see themselves, and in my opinion, also rightfully so, as the people that won World War II, the people that paid the biggest price. So that also influenced the way Putin thinks. And Daniel, you mentioned that there were liberal politicians in the 90s. To our viewers, you have to understand that it's not liberal the same as you would consider a liberal in the States or maybe in Canada or maybe in Europe, right? Everything is relative. So in the 90s, in USSR and Russia, compared to what came before that, those people could be considered as liberals, but definitely it's not on the same scale as liberals in the West.
It's more to oppose like free market. They were like pro free market, and you had like the old style communists who were against free market, who were against private property. Those people were for free market, for private property, for closer ties with the West.
Right,
In
but
Russia, it was
it's a big topic, right? Like we don't want to
yeah.
unwrap it just now. This was a great episode, and we got to the point where we described kind of the background of Putin, where he came from, what he did before he became a president, and our next episode we will talk more in detail about his strategy and how he behaved since he started on the path of being the president of Russia. Any final words, Daniel?
No, thank you. I think that you summed it up, and I think that it will be really interesting to start talking how Putin actually behaved once he got real power, because there really interesting stuff starts.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thank you for your time. Thank you for our viewers. And until next time.